Welcome back to the morning show here on Arise News. Nigerians have been reacting to the 2026 budget presentation by President Bola Tinubu, with lawmakers in the National Assembly applauding the proposed total expenditure of 58.1 trillion naira. They lauded the budget parameters and the focus on three areas of priority, especially the huge investment of 5.14 trillion naira on security.
We've had a year-on-year economic growth. Inflation over the last 8 months, month-on-month, has fallen consistently over the last 8 months. We have renewed investors' confidence, which was shown by the improved country rating. There's been an increase in tax revenues through the tax reforms that we passed as an act of parliament. Production of oil, of crude, has increased to peak record time. And most especially, our external reserves have grown to a 7-year high of $47 billion. This shows a remarkable stewardship over the economy.
The budget presents a very veritable platform towards gauging the performance of government and governance in the country. And so, Mr. President has laid a budget and he has given indications of what to expect from the budget. I'm kind of an incurable optimist, and I believe, quite frankly, that better days are ahead.
Mr. President said it is not about what we quote, but about what we deliver. So I believe that Mr. President should be able to deliver on what he has promised. But the most important thing about this budget is that the issue of parallel budgets running simultaneously has been stopped.
He has laid his budget and made the budget speech. We'll go back and look at the budget and dissect the content. What is important for us, no matter what is laid before us, we want the president's words to be matched with actions that will reflect in the lives of the Nigerian people.
Most importantly, he has made a commitment to pay all liabilities, all contractual obligations of this government. That has been a major challenge in the 2025 budget. But I think with the current budget and the consolidation of the 2025 and 2026 budgets, I think the issue of lack of payment of contractor will be taken off the path.
Well, no surprises there, you dare say, given that it's been one close relationship between the lawmakers and the president, sometimes a relationship too close for comfort for a lot of Nigerians. But for a more seasoned analysis of the 2026 budget estimates, we are now being joined by Dr. Muda, Yusuf, a former Director General of Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry and currently CEO of Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise. Good to have you again on the morning show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, and compliments of the season to you.
Wish you the same.
Thank you. Yeah.
Now, Dr. Yusuf, does the 2026 budget realistically, address Nigeria's current economic challenges, especially inflation, unemployment, and weak purchasing power?
Well, I think the bigger issue around the budget is the need to restore credibility to the budget process. Because the experience we've had in the last two budgets, underscored the need for us to ensure that we have a budget process that is much more credible. And in the speech by the president, the president spoke with candor. He also admitted some of the shortcomings in the past budget, and he was very emphatic on the need to correct those anomalies. And those anomalies include all these multiple budgets running concurrently. He also spoke about the need for realism in the budget. And what I mean by that is to ensure that the assumptions that underpin the budget are also realistic assumptions. And that is why when he was delivering the speech, he talked about this is also a budget of realism. And the thing to underscore that is that if you look at the budget of 2025, the assumptions, for instance, oil price assumption was $75 per barrel.
Yes.
Oil production was 2.06 million barrels per day. And these were far at variance with what the reality is. And we also had a situation where the budget, I think, was presented by the president at 49 trillion. The National Assembly moved it up to about 54 trillion or so. So all of these things had made the budget to be something almost unimplementable, and we saw the consequences of that. So the good thing about what the president did was to take responsibility and to admit that these anomalies will be corrected, and that is why he, before the budget presentation itself, he had presented an appropriation act to repeal and reenact the 2025 budget, to ensure that they clean up the process. So I must say that it's a good thing that the president admitted to that and has committed to correcting the process and clean it. Because if a budget doesn't have credibility, it's as good as the paper on which it's written. And he alluded to that copiously in his address. So we are hoping that this budget will be a lot more realistic, because if you look at the assumptions, the oil price was $64 per barrel. I'm hoping that it will even go lower, because when you are budgeting, it is very important that you are a lot more conservative in terms of your revenue, so that you make your budgeting more realistic. Because if you overbloat the revenue and you now build your expenditure based on that expected revenue, at the end of the day, you'll be struggling with implementation. And that is the problem we had with the last two budgets. So for this, the oil price was brought down to $64 per barrel. I'm hoping it will go down, because if you look at all the projections,
will go down.
The oil price,
the assumptions is at 64.
It's at 64, yes.
But if it goes down, won't that affect the projections of the budget?
No, that is why I'm talking about realism.
Exactly.
You have to be realistic.
Absolutely.
If you scale it down, then you have to scale down your expenditure. Because what is the point in having huge expenditure?
Thinking that you
yes,
make 10 naira,
yes, exactly. Then many MDAs were complaining the budget is not being implemented. The contractors were complaining. All of these things arose as a result of, defective underlining assumption of the budget. So if you see the assumption come to around 60,
yes,
that will be much more realistic.
Absolutely.
And the oil output too. Last year it was 2.06 million barrels per day.
Yes.
This time it has been brought down to 1.8.
1.8.
That also makes sense. But then, even 1.8...
Even though we've not started hitting 1.8.
Yeah, exactly. So we need also to be realistic with that. So I'm expecting that even for the oil outputs, when the consideration of the budget begins by the National Assembly, these are things that they should adjust. And on top of that,
yes, sir,
the National Assembly has this habit of increasing the budget. There's all this talk about constituency projects and all of that. So that at the end of the day, we often have very bloated budgets that the revenue situation cannot support. So we also need to caution the National Assembly. In considering this budget, they should ensure that they align with the President's disposition, that we need to make this budget as realistic as possible.
All right.
So that will restore the credibility and trust of all the stakeholders in the entire budget process.
All right, Dr. Yusuf, I like where you pick the conversation from, restoring credibility on the one hand, and on the other hand, an admonition to the National Assembly. But a lot of people will say that this is the third budget estimate that the Tinubu administration is presenting. And that why, even though the anomaly of overlapping budgets, concurrent budgets, 2 or 3 running at the same time, started sadly during Buhari administration. But this is the third budget that Tinubu administration is presenting. People might be wondering, why wait till your third budget before you correct that anomaly? But then, better late than never, as people will say. How, therefore, do you think that the president aims to stop this? What will it require? What instrumentality of the law will be put in place so that by end of March 2026 that the president promised, we will be done with both the 2024 and the 2025 budget and now face, as he has promised, strictly the 2026 budget. What will he need to do?
Well, first, this is a governance issue.
Okay.
And the president talked about, and he was very emphatic, that this is about fiscal discipline.
Yes.
And he also was very emphatic on his directive to the finance minister, to the minister of budget. To the director of budget, that this budget has to be implemented to the letter. And for you to also make that possible, I go back again to the assumptions.
Okay.
Because you can't build something on nothing. If you build something on a faulty foundation, that structure cannot stand. So the realism of the assumption is also key. So if you align all of that, and coupled with the fact that the president was also very emphatic on the imperative, on the need for the government, generating agencies of government,
yes,
to make sure that they remit, because this has been a recurring issue. Even at the National Assembly, they often lament that these revenue agencies, they don't remit, they don't, year in, year out. We have been hearing that. But what the president said, without holding brief for the president, because I'm not their spokesperson, but I listened to him, he talked about using technology to ensure that all the leakages around the revenue generating agencies are plugged, and ensuring that all the revenues that are supposed to be remitted are also remitted. And there's also expectation around the tax reform, that the tax reform process is also likely, to improve the revenue performance. Because if we're able to tidy up the revenue side, the challenges of implementation, the challenges of deficit, the challenges of debt, those things will be significantly moderated. So these are the things I think the president has put on the table. I'm hoping that we'll be able to follow through to ensure that, these things are effectively implemented as he has proposed.
If they follow through, you think that by April 2026, we'll be done with the previous budget and we'll face 2026?
Well, that is a bit on the optimistic side, I must admit that. Because what was reenacted for the approval of the National Assembly before the presentation of the main budget was a budget of about 43 trillion. To clean up both what we have in 2024 and what we have in 2025. Now we have a budget again of 58 trillion. So I think we need some clarification around that. I'm not in a position to properly clarify because we need to have more. They need to give us more information on how what was presented. To clean up the 2025 and 2024 appropriation. And what was presented as 2026 appropriation, how we are going to reconcile that to make sure that we achieve what the president said we want to achieve.
Okay. So how sustainable, is the budget deficit, contained in the 2026 proposal? And what are the implications of continued deficit financing for Nigeria's debt profile?
Well, deficit financing in itself is not entirely a bad thing. There are parameters to assess the quality or the compliance level to best practices of the deficit. I look at the deficit as a percentage of GDP. That is also contained in the Fiscal Responsibility Act. That is generally around 3 to 4% of GDP.
It's 4.28% of GDP.
The one that was presented. So, yes, it's slightly above what the threshold is. But I agree with you, we need to worry about deficit because deficit is also is deficit that drives the debt. And if you look at the debt servicing burden,
deficit means you have to borrow to finance the budget.
You have to borrow, yes. And if you look at the burden of servicing the debt, it's becoming concerning, really. Because even in this budget, I think debt service provision was about 15 trillion.
15 trillion.
That is a lot. Because if you are talking about revenue expectation of 34 trillion,
yes,
and there is no guarantee that you will hit that 34 trillion, And you now have a debt service component of 15 trillion. That's almost 50% of the revenue. And the thing about the debt servicing is that it's a first-line charge. No matter what your priorities are, you must first and foremost service the debt. So it is what is left that you now begin to, see how you appropriate among the MDAs. And part of the reason we have been having this recurring challenge with budget implementation is also the fact that the debt servicing burden has been shrinking the fiscal space. It's a lot, because if your revenue comes down, maybe to 25 or something, the percentage of the debt service as a percentage of revenue will go up. Sometimes it can go up to 60-70%. And that will throw you back to the problem of having to borrow more. So you have a vicious cycle. So as much as possible going forward, we need to address our debt management issues properly so that we don't have this pressure of debt servicing on our budget, on our fiscal space, and on our budget implementation. It's very important that we address that because, quite frankly, I'm also not too comfortable with the size of the amount that we, year in, year out, appropriate for budget, to service the budget or to service the debt, And talking about debt, we also need to worry about the cost at which we also borrow. There are also concerns about the cost at which we borrow, particularly all these Euro bonds and these commercial debts. We can do a bit more with what we call the multilateral debt or the bilateral debt. Bilateral debt is the facility we get from country to country. Multilateral is what you get from World Bank, ADB, and the rest of them. Those ones, their terms are much more concessional. But when it comes to commercial debt, which is Euro bond, their risks are a bit on the high side. So we need to look at issues of debt sustainability. It's very, very important. If you want to ensure that we get this entire issue of the budget process right and make it a lot more sustainable.
Okay, very well said. One of the highlights of the budget presentation by the president was his highlight on the fact that the Nigerian economy grew by 3.98%, which in 2025 compared to 3.86% in 2024. And his emphasis was that at least the economy is on the right track, is growing. But then people will say that how do we reconcile that with the fact that the government is still struggling in the area of revenue generation? In 2025 budget, it was about 40 trillion revenue projection, which was not met, at all. This year, for 2026, they've reduced it, as you said, to about 34.33 trillion, even though the budget size for 2026 is bigger than that of the current budget. Is that an admission that it will still be a tall order to raise more money, to generate revenue for the country? And do you think that the new tax policy, which has now become law, will play any role for this government next year in generating more revenue?
Yeah, I think the president also alluded to that in his speech, that the new tax regime that we will be, adopting next year is likely to impact positively on revenue. I think what was said and all these budget projections were anchored partly on the expectation that the new tax regime will improve on the revenue performance. Secondly, the president also said that there is going to be better commitment to oil output, to ensure that because we have much better control over output than the price. So if you are able to do more with that, that will also impact positively on revenue. Then he was also very emphatic, and again I come back to these revenue generating agencies, because it's one of the biggest challenges that we have been grappling with, for a couple of years now. Because you have some agencies of government, they are so rich and all of that. They are flush with a lot of money and all of that. And most times, they spend practically everything that they generate. Now, what the president said in his speech is that there's going to be a lot more discipline around that to ensure that all these revenue agencies actually remit what they should remit. So whatever has been projected, I think, is anchored on those revenue expectations, So that is what I think is driving that optimism. But in all of this, again, I admit we need to manage expectations.
But does this sound like Nigerians will have to pay more taxes? Obviously, even though Taiwo Uyedele has said repeatedly that, for some categories of people, they won't have to pay. But then, some people will have to fund this budget via tax. But then we're saying that it's a budget of renewed resilience and shared prosperity. Isn't it more of resilience now than shared prosperity?
No. You see, there are two ways of looking at it. If you look at the totality of the economy, because the economy is not just about the government.
That's true.
In fact, if you look at the government as a percentage of GDP, I don't think it's more than 5%, 6%, or 7%. The larger segment of the economy is driven by the private sector. And given what has been happening around the macroeconomic environment generally, prosperity within the private sector space is improving. Business confidence is improving. And that is also reflecting even on revenue. Because if we talk about revenue performance, the non-oil segment of the revenue has been doing fairly well. In fact, they have been surpassing targets. If you look at the company income tax, if you look at VAT, those two have over the last 2 they have been surpassing their target. So that's a reflection of the fact that the performance outside of government is getting better. That is reflecting in the company income tax. It's also reflecting in VAT. So that segment of the economy is moving ahead. Even the state governments are not complaining about budget implementation. How many of them are complaining that they cannot implement? In fact, many of them are doing much better in terms of budget implementation. So we need to identify those bright spots that are happening, that things are doing well within the issue here is essentially about managing finances at the federal level, which is what all of these things is all about. So generally, I think I'm personally optimistic that this will be much better than what we have last year. And I'm optimistic that at least we take some lessons from what the experience with the 2024 budget, the 2025 budget, to make sure that the 2026 budget is a much better budget, And generally, again, if you look at the key macro indicators, inflation is dropping, although some people debate it and say that prices are higher. But prices are actually dropping in some cases.
Food items?
Yeah, food items,
Purchasing power, though, is getting weaker despite the drop in prices.
Hey, it's getting weaker. But the point again, I go back to what I said. If you look at the private sector segment of the economy, things are getting better. Many of the businesses that declared losses in 2024, many of them have returned to profitability. Even some businesses that left the country, some of them are even coming back. And new investors are coming. So the prosperity within the larger space of the economy is likely to trickle down to jobs and also welfare. But more importantly, the government has to be more deliberate about addressing the welfare issues in the economy outside all this macroeconomic conversation. We need to be more specific. We need to be more targeted, on addressing the welfare issues. That's the cost of food, cost of energy, cost of transportation, cost of education, cost of health.
Absolutely, because
there has to be direct.
Because minimum wage all over the world should be a reflection of
exactly.
Your PCI. But here, what can 70,000 do at this point in time?
We need to address, and we must also emphasize this on the final that the subnationals have a major role to play in this economy.
Correct.
Because each time we have conversation, we're always looking at the federal government. But the subnationals, they're also getting richer. They have to bring something to the table.
I think that's
in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of infrastructure, even security.
So
that's part of the reason why the president said that the governors must release the allocations to local government. Otherwise, he will have to intervene directly by himself.
Exactly. That's the spirit.
Thank you, Dr.
Muda Yusuf, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise and former DG LCCI. Thank you so much for joining us on the Morning Show.
Thank you.